And it got stranger and stranger. I'll just tell you one aspect of this case. Life codes tested the samples to see the sex of the sources. They took a probe for the Y chromosome. And if you use a probe for the Y chromosome, it's a male sample, you get a single band in just the right place that says this is from the Y chromosome. And if it's from a female, you see nothing. So they tested the samples, and the blood from the deceased woman, nothing. The blood from the watch, nothing. They declared a perfect match. Now in science, we often like to have this thing called positive control, something that would tell you that the experiment had actually worked. And they did indeed, over on the right side of this X-ray film, have a lane labeled control. And if you looked in the lane labeled control, you saw nothing. So, I suggest that we ask the lab director, who's the control? So I asked him, who's the control? And he said, we use cervical cancer cells. 2 weeks later, the technician who actually performed the experiments takes a look at this thing, suggests we ask him, why are they using cervical cancer cells? So I ask him, and he says, cervical cancer cells? We don't use cervical cancer cells. We use DNA from somebody in the lab. I get DNA from my lab mate, Arthur Eisenberg. So 2 weeks later, the lab director is back on the witness stand. And I suggest they ask him, if that's DNA from Arthur Eisenberg, what's up with his Y chromosome? Like, why isn't there a band there? And so they ask him, and without missing a beat, he says, oh, that's very interesting. Arthur has an unusual genetic condition. He has a short Y chromosome that's missing those sequences. Eventually, life codes would come to testify that it wasn't actually Arthur Eisenberg at all. It was a woman in the lab named Ellie Mead. And the way they figured this out was they got everybody in the lab and they did DNA fingerprinting on everybody in the lab to figure out who their control had been for the DNA fingerprinting. So, it was pretty clear these guys were bungling this case. They were clearly making up protocols in the lab, and maybe they were making up things on the witness stand too, I don't want to say. But I had gotten completely radicalized, and at this point I told the lawyers, okay, I'm going to testify. I flew down to New York, went to the Bronx Criminal Courthouse in the Grand Concourse on 161st Street, in the shadow of Yankee Stadium, to testify in the courtroom of Judge Jerry Scheinman. As an aside, Judge Scheinman's wife was also a New York City judge, a family court judge, Judith Scheinman, until she stepped down from the bench a few years later to become a judge on television, where you may know her as Judge Judy. But anyway, I digress. Judge Scheinman was having the time of his life. He was bragging to all the other judges in the criminal courthouse, you guys have these drug dealers and rapists and pimps. I have the best scientists in the world testifying in my court. And he was in no rush to end this hearing. So I testified for a solid day, and another day, and another day. By the time I was done, I had testified for 6 days in this pretrial hearing.